In addition to the grueling work of rescue and recovery on the ground, Hurricane Harvey has stirred up political challenges and marked the first natural disaster on President Trump's watch. For what's at stake, we get the analysis of Shields and Brooks. That's syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. To what extent has the storm on Friday and what has ensued changed what's going to happen in Washington in September? Do you think this is a reset in a sense, David?
I've decided to take the most willfully confident, or at least optimistic, point of view. Just maybe post-flood, the dove comes bearing the olive branch, and things will get better. I do think there's a potential things to get better. The Republicans were headed toward dysfunction this fall with the budget showdowns, with this fight over the wall, possible government shutdown, and now they at least have a pretext, all the while knowing they look dysfunctional and they have to get something done. Now they have a pretext to change the subject, to put some budget relief in there for the flood without doing offsets, without trying to rip the money out from other programs. And they could say, hey, we can't do the wall right now, we got to rebuild Texas. And by the way, on the background, you're going to need a lot of construction workers in Texas. And this is a country with a construction worker shortage. So maybe this isn't the time to crack down on immigration. And so I think there's a possibility, if they want to look functional, to seize this moment, whether they will or not, but I'm going for maximal optimistic unrealism.
So, Mark, would you agree that the storm has given Republicans some cover for a kumbaya moment?
Not necessarily a kumbaya moment, because I think that's impossible with Donald Trump, because he's so mercurial, so volatile, and so self-obsessed. But I think it's a great political opportunity for Republicans, partly for the reasons that David said. The old maxim in combat in World War II was, there are no atheists in a foxhole. There are no libertarian, conservative, small government people at a time when they're in the wake of a hurricane. People turn, what's the government going to do? I want it done. Even the much ridiculed and legitimately so Ted Cruz, who ran for president, proclaiming he was the most unpopular man in the Senate, earned that epithet, sobriquet, by opposing any hurricane aid to the citizens of New York and New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy. And 22 of 23 Republican members of Congress from Texas, including John Cornyn, the senator, and Cruz, opposed it. Now, of course, they are the biggest exhorters for federal aid, federal involvement, national government rushing in. So, but I do think it's an opportunity for Republicans to unite and to get away from the wall and the president's empty threat to close the government if it weren't funded.
I want to talk a little bit about what's going to go on in Washington in just a moment, but a couple things about the response on the ground. We didn't have a Brownie moment this go-round as we did in Katrina. Is your sense that politically the Trump administration did well in the way things happen on the ground as far as the immediate response in Texas and Louisiana, David?
Yeah, I would say the range of government programs seem to go well. The people on this program and all the ones we've seen interviewed, I think they've generally been impressive. They had tough calls to make, the mayor of Houston, on whether to evacuate or not. That was a tough call. You could argue it either way. The people seem to be responding. To me, the two biggest things that happened was, first, Houston came together. And that's significant because Houston is the most ethnically diverse city in this country. And there's an argument that's sometimes made, we'll never have solidarity as a nation if we're so ethnically diverse. Well, Houston does it. And so if they can do it, I think that argument against making our country diverse or opening up more immigration falls down. The second thing is that I think as Washington becomes more dysfunctional, power is going to the cities and states. And I thought the basic efficacy of the Houston government this week is further sign that may have to happen even more.
So, Mark, would you agree that maybe the lessons of Katrina, for example, bore out, and perhaps not only were the localities better equipped, but people themselves were better prepared? Is that possible, or is this something the Trump administration can take credit for?
I don't know if there's credit. I think that there's certainly early returns are encouraging, and I think the public sector, I think the private sector, I think the voluntary sector, I think citizens, whether it's the Cajun Navy, whether it's corporate involvement, and citizens helping citizens, I think has been impressive. It's been encouraging at a time of dysfunction, of almost malaise in the country. in the midst of this national tragedy and personal tragedy, it's been a source of some inspiration, of some elevation, at least. So I think in that sense, it's good. I mean, I think the president, not to belabor it, but I think he made a mistake by trying to lift the morale of folks by saying it's going to be quick. It's not going to be quick. It's going to be long and arduous and difficult and painful and dislocating. But I think we got a good start.
Yeah, it's a much longer road than I think people fully appreciate. And once we in the media and the nation kind of moves on to the next thing, it gets very difficult for these people on the ground. They still have a huge problem. Quick. The administration wants to move as quickly as possible, it says, to get a relief package underway. How realistic is that, David? Do you think that there's, given all that happened post-Hurricane Sandy and the efforts that you mentioned of Senator Cruz and others to try to block that aid package, will there be obstacles?
Yeah, I think the first tranche of this package they'll get. The second issue is whether they have what I talked about before, the offsets. And this is what Republicans have traditionally demanded. If we're going to pay for Sandy relief, if we're going to pay for Katrina relief, we got to rip the money from some other program. And that seems to me an insane way to do government. We've got these permanent domestic policy programs, and we have a pretty steady state of disasters that we have to pay for. Every time we have a disaster, to rip money from the permanent programs just seems like crazy. Will they insist on the offsets this time? I think in the first tranche, probably no. But the second tranche, $15 billion maybe in the first, but they're talking about $150 billion need. And so that's just a gigantic budget lift.
Well, and the proposal was to take money away from FEMA to help fund the border wall, right?
Yes,
I guess that's probably a dead issue at the moment.
I don't think that's going to be revitalized run back up the flagpole. I do think that Republicans are flirting, of course, with their tax cut, which has always been the narcotic of Republicans. That they in fact have to at some point, with any remote pretense of candor, abandon any pretense of a balanced budget. I mean, they talk about because they're going to finance the tax cut by tax cuts. That's how they're going to do it. And I do think that the will is there right now in the Congress to act. There will not be a Ted Cruz from the Northeast opposing aid to help people in Texas and Louisiana. I think they'll be as close to unity as you'll see on Capitol Hill this year.
All right, so what about the talk of a government shutdown, which was in play before the storm came in? Is that gone now, you think?
Well, if this were a normal country with a normal government, you would think there's no way. I think
but that is not the case.
That's not the case. So you think there's still some chance. I have trouble. I do think this was a moment where there were some unification. The Republicans know they can't be total disasters as the governing party, and I just wish there was some more forward-looking enthusiasm. The Chicago fire, the San Francisco earthquake. These are moments of revitalization for those cities, a chance to take the disaster and really build something. So far, I haven't seen much of a chance. What are we going to do with this, and how are we going to make Houston a different city and a better city than even it was?
Well, I suppose you can make an argument that instead of talking about border walls, we should be talking about seawalls, right? Why not?
Well, the problem is that every study I'm aware of, which is probably not that many, has indicated that a dollar spent in preparation and avoidance of natural disasters is worth $15 that's spent in relief. But there's no political payoff for preparation. So who benefits? I mean, the governor or the senator or the president, Bill Clinton at Oklahoma City. His performance there helped him enormously. John Lindsay almost ended his career on a snowstorm in New York City, and certainly George Bush and Katrina. So there doesn't seem to be any political reward for making the preparation, doing the hard work of building seawalls and taking. And part of Houston's charm has been that there's been no zoning. There really hasn't been any regulation that would, in fact, interfere with environmental disaster. It's a trade-off that they've made in Houston that has led to the fact that there is affordable housing, even though it might be next to a machine shop and a junkyard.
It seems we prefer to fund the fire department rather than buying fire insurance. It's kind of the way we roll in this country in some ways. So, all right, so I got to ask this because it has come into play a lot this week. Is there any chance that there'll be some sort of sea change, if you will, in political discussions about climate change in the wake of this. How many of these storms do we have to go through before politicians come around on this one, David?
I would be stunned. Climate change, in the way it wasn't 20 years ago, it's a total partisan issue now. If you're a Republican,
is that because Al Gore ran for? That's the moment, isn't it?
I happen to think he had some positive effects with the movement, but I think he had a very negative effect. You used to have John McCain, a lot of other Republicans with climate change legislation, and once it became a Democratic issue, the Republicans had to go on the other side, and that was a perverse effect of what Al Gore did.
What do you think? Any chance of this?
Denial is more than a river in Egypt. I mean, Eddie Bernice Johnson, the Democratic Congresswoman from Texas, pointed out her Republican colleagues. She said, this is the third once in 500 storm that we've had in the past 3 years. At some point, you have to say, what's going on here? Is there something that I'm not considering? But I agree with David that they will not. They're not going to move on it. There's certainly, I don't see the leadership anywhere.
Well, you don't have to be a math guy to realize that's not working out very well, right? No. All right, so, but as far as the funding issues, they got to fund the government, they got to take care of the debt ceiling, all that's going to happen, you think now? What's your thoughts on that? That's a lot of work to do right there. Glorious
trudge through. But I think what's happened on Capitol Hill is they've divorced the Trump administration. They've said, this guy's an independent. We're going to have to do this thing ourselves. And if they can't do this, then the whole Republican Party's in big trouble.
What about tax reform? That was something that, in the midst of this storm, President Trump was talking about. Is there any chance there'll be any traction on that?
There is no tax reform. What it is a tax cut, and they have concluded that there's a real problem in this country when it comes to money distribution. That the poor have too much and the rich don't have enough. And this is the solution.
Just to make Mark feel good, I don't think anything's going to pass. I was thinking, who was in office, who was in power in 1986? You had Dan Rostenkowski in the House, a guy named Bob Packwood in the Senate,
Pat
you had Jane Baker, Pat Moynihan, Bill Bradley. This was like the dream team of legislative skill. And there's just nobody like that because people do not have the experience to pass complicated legislation, let alone a White House. Tax reform is incredibly hard because every time you cut a loophole, there's an army that wants to preserve it. And it's just hard. Dick Darman is another figure.
No, I mean,
and
able people.
We've sort of lost human capital in Washington of people who know how to do complicated stuff.
It's a good point. We've devalued it. I mean, when you run against Washington long enough and deprecate public service, I mean, after a while, you stop attracting, making it appealing for talented people to come and to stay. And then public service was an honorable and important and valuable.
The talent is as high, but the experience is low. Those people had put through over the previous 20 or 30 years lots of complicated legislation, especially under Johnson, even under Nixon. And the people now, they just don't have the experience of doing that.
Experience counts, said the gray-haired guy sitting at the table, right?
I've always been a big fan of term limits, especially in surgeons,
Yeah, absolutely. Just quickly, it's just as the White House staff turns, the piece that came out today indicating that the president has become disenchanted with his new chief of staff, John Kelly. Basically, the 15 people anonymously sourced in this story said Donald Trump doesn't like to be handled. Any news here? Is this any surprise to either of you? And is John Kelly on his way out, you think?
There's an old aphorism that says someone who's always finding everyone else to be a horse's ass. When you meet 3 horses' asses in one day, the horse's ass is you. I mean, the problem is the guy who's still there. I mean, it's not. I mean, he was going to get us the best people because he knew the best people. He was going to bring them to Washington and going to just get everything done and get everything passed. He brought the best people to Washington. They've all left, and now we're working on the second, third round. I mean, at some point you've got to conclude it is the problem is the person who's there.
All right, button it up quickly for me.
Yeah, well, actually it was the B team that went out first. Okay. So now if he starts firing people, he's really firing what to him is the A team.
I never thought of Mike Flynn as the A team.
So I don't think he's going to end up doing it. But the guy's always fuming about something, and the fuming doesn't often lead to anything, and I suspect that's the case here.
David Brooks, Mark Shields, have a great holiday weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Miles.